Have you ever noticed how you can explain your own trauma response and still have a panic attack at 2 a.m.? Like, you know exactly why you're spiraling. You can name the attachment style. You can identify the trigger. You've probably seen 3 TikToks, read 2 threads, and screenshotted a quote about nervous system regulation. And yet, your heart is still racing. Your chest still feels tight. You're still overthinking that text you sent 4 hours ago. That's the paradox people keep noticing about Gen Z, the most self-aware generation, and somehow also the most anxious. Older generations sometimes say they're too sensitive, or they overthink everything. But here's the psychological reality. Awareness doesn't cancel anxiety. In fact, sometimes it amplifies it. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine growing up with a mirror in front of your brain 24/7. Not just your physical reflection, but your inner world constantly reflected back to you. That's what social media did. Previous generations had diaries. Maybe therapy if they were lucky. Gen Z had algorithms. Suddenly your private thoughts weren't so private. They were categorized, labeled, psychoanalyzed in 60-second videos. You didn't just feel sad. You wondered, is this depression or burnout? You didn't just get nervous before a date. You asked, is this my anxious attachment? You didn't just feel different. You searched, am I neurodivergent? This level of introspection is unprecedented. Studies over the past decade show that Gen Z reports higher levels of mental health literacy than any previous generation. You know the vocabulary: trauma, boundaries, gaslighting, emotional regulation. That's powerful. Language gives shape to experience. When you can name something, it becomes less mysterious. But here's the twist. When you can name everything, you can also monitor everything. Your brain is a prediction machine. That's what neuroscience tells us. It constantly scans for threats, trying to anticipate what might go wrong so it can keep you safe. Now add hyper-awareness to that system. Now add constant exposure to global crises, economic instability, climate anxiety, and comparison culture. You don't just worry about your own life. You worry about the world. So, your brain works overtime. Think about it like this. Self-awareness is like turning on the lights in a messy room. Suddenly you see everything: the clutter, the dust, the unfinished projects. It's empowering because now you can clean. But at first, it's overwhelming. Gen Z grew up with the lights already on. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. Psychologists talk about something called metacognition. It's basically thinking about your thinking. And Gen Z does this constantly. You're not just anxious. You're anxious about being anxious. You're not just sad. You're analyzing why you're sad, whether you're healing correctly, whether you're being toxic, whether you're self-sabotaging. It's like having a commentator in your head, narrating your emotional life in real time. Now add social media to that. Platforms reward vulnerability, but they also reward performance. So there's this strange tension. Be authentic, but also make it aesthetic. Share your healing journey, but make sure it's coherent, relatable, postable. That creates pressure, not just to feel, but to curate your feelings. And here's where anxiety quietly sneaks in. When you're constantly observing yourself, you split into 2 roles, the one living and the one watching. The observer can be wise, but it can also be critical. It can ask, are you doing enough? Are you evolving fast enough? Are you too much? Not enough? It's exhausting. But let's zoom out for a second, because this isn't just about phones and hashtags. It's historical. Every generation adapts to its environment. Gen Z was shaped by uncertainty. Many of you grew up during recessions, political polarization, a pandemic during formative years. Stability felt fragile. When the world feels unstable, your nervous system becomes vigilant. Hyper-awareness is actually an adaptation. If the environment is unpredictable, your brain tries to predict harder. That's not weakness, that's intelligence. In fact, researchers have found that individuals who grow up in rapidly changing environments often develop heightened social sensitivity. You read micro-expressions, you sense tone shifts in text messages, you notice when someone's energy changes in a room. That's self-awareness extending outward. It's empathy on high alert. But empathy without boundaries becomes emotional overload. And here's another layer people don't talk about enough. Gen Z was encouraged to find your passion, heal your trauma, be your best self, all while navigating an economy that makes traditional milestones harder to reach. So there's this internal pressure to optimize everything: career, relationships, mental health, identity. You're not just living, you're optimizing. And optimization culture feeds anxiety because it whispers, you could always be doing better. So, yes, you're self-aware, deeply. You question patterns your parents never questioned. You break cycles. You talk about therapy openly. That's revolutionary. But you're also carrying the weight of constant evaluation by society, by algorithms, by yourself. Sometimes the anxiety isn't a flaw. It's a byproduct of consciousness. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. The more aware you are of possibilities, the more you become aware of risks. Freedom is beautiful, but it's also overwhelming. When you realize you can choose your path, you also realize you can choose wrong. That awareness creates tension. Gen Z lives in a world of infinite choices, careers that didn't exist 10 years ago, identities that are more fluid, lifestyles that are customizable. That freedom is empowering. But the brain? It likes certainty. Too many options can feel like standing in front of 1,000 open doors, terrified of picking the one that closes the others. So, you hesitate, you overthink, you analyze. And yet, here's what I want you to really sit with. Anxiety is often a sign that you care. It means you're engaged with your life. It means you're aware enough to reflect. The goal isn't to turn off awareness, it's to pair it with self-compassion. Imagine if the observer in your head wasn't a critic but a coach. Instead of, why are you like this? It says, of course you're overwhelmed. Look at what you're carrying. Instead of, you should be healed by now. It says, healing isn't linear. Self-awareness without kindness becomes self-surveillance. But self-awareness with kindness becomes growth. And maybe that's the evolution happening right now. Gen Z isn't just the most self-aware. You're the first generation collectively trying to learn emotional skills in public. Of course it's messy. Of course it's anxious. You're building the plane while flying it. So, the next time you catch yourself spiraling, analyzing your own reaction to your reaction, pause. Take a breath. Remember that your brain learned to be vigilant for a reason. Thank it. And then gently remind it that not every thought needs a thesis statement. You don't have to optimize your existence. You don't have to turn every feeling into content. Sometimes it's enough to just feel imperfectly, privately. And maybe that's the real strength here. Not that you're hyper-aware, but that you're brave enough to look inward at all. If any of this felt uncomfortably accurate, I'd love to hear your experience. Do you feel more self-aware than anxious? Or anxious because you're self-aware? Let's talk about it. And if you're on this journey of understanding your own mind a little more gently, stick around. The more you understand your brain, the less it has to scare you.